Meera Mukherjee, the sculptor, was a lady from Bhawanipur in Calcutta. I knew her very closely. I started seeing her exhibitions from last 30 years or maybe 35 years ago. Somehow I got drawn towards her. I found her works very fascinating. I started visiting her house in Bhawanipur, though I was warned that she's a very difficult person and she's not easily accessible. But somehow we got along very well from the very beginning, and I started visiting her regularly. We started going to Elachi in the village where she worked with the villagers. And then I also started collecting her works. Also wanted to do her exhibition, which did happen later. She mentioned to me once that if you ever want to do a book, which I did want to, I showed interest, she said you must meet Arun Ganguly. He has covered a lot of my work process with his photography.
A book on the sculptor Meera Mukherjee has long been in the planning with Galerie 88. Supriya Banerjee has been talking to both me and Adip about putting such a book together. And we were also thinking about how we could do the book a bit differently, given that there's already a fair amount of writing that already exists on her. Her centenary is almost here. And I thought this may be the moment to finally kickstart something that has long been on the anvil. And what came to our attention was this extraordinary archive of photographs by Arun Ganguly that existed on the artist. An archive of photographs that spans about 2 decades, the last 2 decades of her working career. There's a gap also in the photographs. So there is a group that is from the late 70s, 78 to be precise. And then after a gap, there is a large body of photographs which are from the 90s, which really marks the last years of the artist's work and in some ways the height of her creativity. Arun Ganguly's photographic archive, which was given to Gallery 88, was a revelation for all of us. This exhibition is of course centrally about the artist, but it is equally about a dialogue between a photographer and an artist at work. To understand a process of image making that connects the sculptor and her materials and methods with a photographer and his interest in documenting the artist's life, her work processes, and the community she lived and worked with. It brought a new kind of attention to aspects of the artist's life and work which was known about, but I don't think we knew with such great intimacy. The photographer's eye and the patience and intensity with which he documented almost matches the patience and intensity with which the artist continuously worked. Now, Arun Ganguly had initially come to do just a commissioned work. She needed some slides made of her finished works for a talk she was giving. But as he remembers, this small commissioned work grew into a passion with him, and he decided that he would set up a parallel black and white camera and begin documenting her working process, both in her flat in Bhawanipur, where she lived, where they were neighbors, and then at Elachi, where she had built her studio and workspace where all her casting took place. So Arun Ganguly's photographs, in a way, he had meticulously archived them also. So every negative sleeve came with details of date and space. It also allows us to travel from between the two locations of her work, Bhawanipur and Elachi. It allows us to watch in detail the different material and processes, and it opens up to a world of her workers. So our exhibition, along with profiling portraits of the artists, really focused on material methods and process and on community life in Elachi. And it profiled a few people like Nirmal Sengupta who were absolutely central to her work, her life, and even her creative process. Most importantly, we were able to feature people like Nimai Bhashkar, artisanal people who she trained and nurtured and made into her fellow workers. Most poignant among Arun Ganguly's photographs are the ones he brings together on the finishing of her last work, the Buddha, and where he documents faithfully the faces of each and every person who helped finish the casting process and then helped to weld the work and put it together. So Arun Ganguly himself became, in some ways, a member of the team, a quiet, patient, meticulous observer of her work and of the life and the communities she had built at Elachi. So we thought this would bring a new angle to the existing work on Meera Mukherjee and allow us to think with these photographs and around the photographs towards the book, where we are hoping much of the text that has gone into this exhibition and the photographs will find a central place.
She used clay instead of as a material for mold. Most sculptors would use plaster and brick dust. Now, clay was used by indigenous artisans, and clay had a very, very definite kind of a result. Meera Mukherjee was trained in Germany and she knew the European process of casting metal inside out. She was trained in casting metal there. But when she came back, she explored the indigenous method of casting metal, and it was a different path altogether. Because the European Sirepedu or the lost wax process was very regularized and a stable process which yielded predictable results. But here it was a completely different process because she was making large sculptures. The indigenous artisans would make small versions. This exhibition is important in regard to the working process of Meera Mukherjee, and very seldom you get to see the process so well documented. And I would say Arun Babu was particularly privileged because Meera Mukherjee allowed him to take photographs and document the entire process of work. She was welding small parts. Initially, she was welding small parts together to make a big sculpture. But later, she improvised that process as well because she knew the European process of metal casting, and she improvised and introduced the process of de-waxing, which is there widely used in the European Sirepedu. But de-waxing as a process very important in terms of those bromides that documents the process of casting. She would do the creative work in wax directly. So that was again another step towards not having additions. which is of course a Meera Mukherjee signature. Meera Mukherjee will supervise the entire process of production, but it is where she had, a more clear, visible dialogue with the children who would make drawings, and then from those drawings, grown-up girls would make the kanthas. And each group in the project would contribute to the visual language. Later, from the kantha again, Abu Taher from North Bengal would weave carpet, and he would bring about technicalities that are involved in making a carpet. So from children's drawing to kantha, and from kantha to carpet, it was a sort of a creative journey which she initiated, and she supervised, and she also took part in, and it was each one of them, the drawings of the children, the kantha of women, and then the carpet. They were very, very evolved pictorial grounds that you get to see. So that was, of course, a community project that she was deeply involved from the 1970s till her death in 1998.
One more point that I wanted to bring up here was that what Arun Ganguly's photographic documentation does is, of course, really open up the working process, the skill, but also the intense labor. And as a woman, the nights of casting were times of intense labor, and the photographs capture that. And some of the memories which we have taken from her own writings also capture the anxieties, the tension, the process. The anxiety of whether ultimately when the cast is broken, what will emerge will match the expectation.